Well, hello and welcome to the next in our series of fireside chats, and I'm absolutely delighted today to be joined by Bishop Geoffrey Driver. Bishop Geoffrey is the 10th Bishop of the Diocese of Gippsland, translated from here to Adelaide in 2005 as Archbishop, and has since retired with Lindy in the diocese, happily for us, at Eagle Point in the Parish of Painesville, where he is the priest in charge, thanks to recent diocesan legislation which makes such things possible. So, Bishop Geoffrey, welcome.
Thank you.
If I can welcome you to your own your own patches of work. So, yeah, thank you for your ministry to us today in the Eucharist we just recorded for Vocations Sunday on the Feast of St Matthew. I love the football analogy that you opened up with. Is your team playing in the finals?
My team is amongst the teams that might roll on the bench, I think.
Yeah, right, okay. my team was the most recently definitely eliminated one. So next year in Jerusalem, get used to saying it's Carlton supporters. So, yeah, but more seriously, I was really appreciated your reference to vocation being not on the basis of who we are or what we've done, but on who we might be and what we might do.
Yeah.
And that's just such a powerful message, I think. Do you, in your experience as one who's helped people discern vocation over many years, do you think sometimes our sense of unworthiness or being unqualified is a barrier?
I think it's a barrier, and I also am delighted when I hear it.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
A story from my life, back in the 70s when I'd come to the conclusion of my theological education. I was just about to be ordained for the Diocese of Bathurst.
Yeah, right.
And I reached a point probably about 6 weeks out from the ordination where I phoned up one of the archdeacons and said, I don't think I can do this, I don't think I should do this. I think I'm not ready, I'm not prepared, I'm not good enough. And he said, that's what I want to hear.
Yeah.
He said, of course you're not.
Yeah.
And I think that's healthy, but it's also something we need to face in ourselves, because we can be held back by the sense of not being capable or not being good enough.
Or our past.
Yeah, in fact, I get quite worried as a bishop when I was making those sorts of decisions, and someone would come up to me and say, God's told me I'm going to be ordained.
Yeah,
and they're full of confidence about that. That is equally worrying,
sure.
Because there needs to be a sense in which we're not adequate, we're not good enough, and you offer what you are.
Yes.
On the basis that God works through who we are, where we are, how we are, and brings things about that are often quite surprising. God is the one musician who can play with a broken instrument.
Yeah, and is always calling us into the fullness and the deepest truth of our identity.
Yeah, sometimes people think about vocation as something out there.
Yeah.
I've got to change my life.
Yeah.
But vocation is the call of every person to become more themselves.
Yeah.
God never calls us to be something else.
Yeah.
So vocation is a lifelong calling to become more and more what God knows we can be. Yeah. But often we don't know.
Yeah.
And so it should be about being more human. And so often we turn vocation into something very religious.
Yes.
But it's actually about living the human life.
Yes, that's right. Anything which draws us out of the authenticity of our humanity is not, a call from God.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, sometimes with clergy, where you see them, the clergy person with the artificial voice or whatever, I worry about that, because in the end, I think the call of Jesus is the call into being more fully alive as a human person.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think the the kind of instruments of discernment are for people who are ready to think about what God might be asking them to do in the world or in the church. What are the kind of, how do people go about that work of discernment? I mean, it's a two-way street. It's always the discernment of the individual and the discernment of the church.
At an individual level, I said to people, what is it you find yourself doing despite yourself? What is it you do instinctively? What is you sometimes find yourself surprised, think, I keep getting drawn to this. That's a good clue, often. And the second thing is, I think, listen to those about you who know you. Because they will often help you understand what it is you're doing. Because the call doesn't begin with some formal process.
Yeah.
It's actually, all that ought to be is a kind of confirmation of what's been going on for a while. So there's two things. And engage in a journey of testing it and quietly moving on with it. I think in the end, one of the things that the church hasn't always done well is to actually allow the people of God to be the instruments of discernment. Sometimes we pull people out of their communities when we should be actually letting them test their call in a living community. And in fact, St. Paul says that sort of things in his letters where he talks about how our gifts are discerned in the body of Christ. So certainly more and more as a bishop, I try to put people in a situation where they could have their call assessed by the local community and not just by some diocesan structure. And that was my experience too. I remember going to Bishop Ken Leslie, the Bishop of Bathurst, and he puffed on his pipe for a while and thought about my vocation. And I didn't go to a vocations conference. I went to Cobar instead, which was a parish of 17,000 square miles.
Wow.
And I acted as a lay minister there for a year. Had a great time in a very remote part of the world. I could travel all day and visit every house on the road and only see 5 people. But I enjoyed it. That was his way of allowing my vocation to emerge in and amongst the people of God. And I think that's a pretty good model, really, for testing vocation. I think there's room for that, particularly in some of the country dioceses. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, we've got that luxury, I guess, of because of our scale, we can have those more direct kind of relational processes. Your vocation, Bishop Jeff, as I mentioned, took you to Adelaide in the early or mid-2000s, and it was at a tough time for the church that you alluded to in your homily today about, one of the factors that has kind of marginalised us, in terms of our place in the wider culture, namely the scandal of the child sexual abuse. And you really were there in Adelaide at a time when you were having to deal with the first big wave, I think, of our kind of institutional response to that. Tell us a little bit about what that time was like for you.
It was a difficult time personally. Perhaps more importantly, it was a very difficult time for the diocese. I think that at the time we didn't know much about how some of these traumatic experiences impact on a community, let alone on individuals. At that stage, those of us who were bishops and who were in dioceses where there were significant numbers were all on a massive learning curve. There wasn't a body of experience we could call on. So we talked to each other, but there was a lot of learning to do. Interestingly enough, with Adelaide, I actually was approached earlier when I was the Bishop of Gippsland here, and said no, because I felt Gippsland is where I needed to be. They didn't elect, and then they came back to me. And I found that very difficult because in a way it goes back to your previous question about exploring vocation. And there's another element there. I think sometimes the truth of vocation comes when you're reluctant.
Yes.
But certainly we went to I think it was about 60 critical incidents we dealt with in that first year, and there was a lot of learning and some degree of real personal struggle and some very big grief for me that I felt that some of the things I wanted to be to the diocese had to be just put aside for quite a while, 4 or 5 years really.
Wow.
And I also had to learn how to put in place structures of support, structures of supervision, ways of dealing with the effect of abuse and trauma, not only in my life but in the life of those around me in the leadership of the diocese.
Because you had to really hold so many of those stories, didn't you?
Yes, absolutely. Hold them with grief, but also hold them sometimes as treasures, because one of the things I found was that some of the survivors of abuse were capable of wonderful grace.
Yes.
And one of the treasures for me of my final service in Adelaide was to look out and see some survivors of abuse there. And so often they gave a gift of grace. That again is an untold story because I knew they were there, but probably others didn't.
Sort of 15 years on from that, how far do you think we've come as a church? I mean, there's still a long way to go, I think.
I think what we've done so far is largely a structural and immediate response. So we've put in place better protocols, processes for redress, for child protection, education, all those sorts of things. But I think the issue that I think needs to be further addressed is the cultural issue behind it all. What is it in the church that makes institutions like the church susceptible? And there are issues of power expressed in symbolism, the way we hold each other to account, that I think are the deeper issues that need to be addressed. They are signalled in the Royal Commission report. For instance, the clericalism of our church and other churches was something that was highlighted in the Royal Commission report. And those are cultural issues. And ultimately you can change structures as much as you like. If you don't change the culture always wins.
That's right.
So there's some big issues of culture that still need to be worked through, I think.
And those are partly spiritual and theological too, aren't they? And your point today about the call to ministry, being for all. As a kind of challenge to that clericalism.
I'm through my time as an Archbishop, and you don't have much time for reflection in that context as you might wish, but particularly as I've been able to take the time to reflect, but even through my time in Adelaide, I became increasingly discomforted with some of the symbols of hierarchy in the church, and uncomfortable with my own place in them, to be honest.
And again, I think that's healthy. The day we get too comfortable, with any of that is a dangerous day, isn't it?
So it came down to even simple things like I actually became uncomfortable with a bishop sitting in a throne. For instance. I think a bishop sits in a place of teaching and a place of service, a place of apostolic reminding, but the culture of the church needs to recover some of that, I think.
Yes, I'm glad we have installations, now rather than enthronements.
Absolutely, yes,
Yeah.
indeed.
Yeah. Vocation never stops, of course, and there's no retirement from the kingdom of God. And your vocation has taken new forms in your kind of retirement from kind of active episcopal ministry. And one of the features of that has been your work at Newton Theological College in Popondetta in Papua New Guinea, and some who are watching might have been part of a wonderful Zoom virtual tour you gave us of that. Just share a little bit about kind of your role there with those who are tuning in today, and why you think that connection is so important for the Australian Church.
Even when I was Bishop of Gippsland, Lindy and I had a sense that there would come a time when we would give ourselves to parts of the world that were materially at least poor.
Yeah.
Because we had a strong sense of living in a country that we're part of that 10% that control 90% of the world's resources, and certainly by influence. I think that's the case. And there was a sense for both of us that we can't live our lives without responding to that reality. So there was an intentional sense of vocation even there, before we knew how it would emerge.
Yeah.
We actually had strong links with Africa, but some of them go back to Gippsland, and the links with Rwanda that we were part of establishing. But also with South Sudan, where we were trying to establish a primary health care clinic, and that's still sitting there for us, waiting for a time when it's safer to go there. Yeah. So the Newton College thing came a bit out of the blue, but it also had a background in that my brother was a missionary in Melanesia, married a Melanesian, and there's been this sort of family link. And when it came as, bishops can be a bit tricky at times, really. I think that a certain bishop who shall remain unnamed, but who's the chair of ABN, said, could I go and write a report about Newton College? And I did that and was happy to do it. Thought that was a couple of weeks' work. But then what followed on from that was a request, well, do you think you might get more involved? And it's led to a pretty deep involvement, and one that I feel very committed to. And part of the reason is that we Australians have this deep link with PNG. It's a link that's part of our history as a nation. We are the midwives. Yeah. And we had a midwifery role in PNG, and it's still our biggest aid recipient. Yes. And the Australian Church founded really that church in PNG. So there's all those links, and even in the Diocese of Gippsland, there's lots of people with links with PNG. So can't go anywhere in Australia without those sort of links. So all those reasons are why I think it matters. I think it matters because we are one of the wealthiest countries in the world, and in the same distance as you can drive and stay within in the Diocese of Gippsland, there's another country. Yeah. And it's one of the poorest countries in the world. Yeah. And it's civil structures and governance are still emerging. It's a very needy country. And to not respond to it as a church, as a nation, I think is to find ourselves in that confronting parable about the rich man eating sumptuously, dressed in purple with a beggar at his gate. Yeah. And if we don't see ourselves, if we can't be confronted with that, then I think we've missed something of the gospel. Yeah,
absolutely. And I know that you get a lot of support for your work in Popondetta from around the National Church and the Diocese. What's the most important or helpful thing that people can do to kind of uphold you in that ministry and support the work, not only of ABM but of the college directly? Yeah,
look, I'm worried at the moment because the Anglican Church of PNG is in a very difficult position financially. Yeah. And so this year, we began the year with half a dozen third-year students. We've had an intake of about 20 in a bridging course, so there's about 26 students there.
Mm.
No diocese, nor the National Church, has put one keener in this year because of the difficult situation. So those students and their families, they live in campus. We provide them accommodation, power. They have gardens. They can live somewhat off sweet potato and dried banana and what else they can grow in their gardens. But with prices much higher than Australia,
Yes.
I really worry about the individuals. Those families are in great need. So one of the challenges I think is, can a parish, can an individual, could a parish afford $50 a month to support a family? Could a parish or a diocese afford $1,500 a year to support a student? It's critical that we as a church in Australia help raise up the future leadership for the Anglican Church at PNG. At times things are so difficult up there that I wonder why I'm there, and then I look at the people and I know why I'm there. Because of them.
Yeah. And we can do that through ABM or directly through...
We can do it through ABM, and we can do it through the Diocese of Gippsland. There's an account here in Sale, and just this week I transferred another amount of money up, which is solely for student support, just to help those families with the basic choices that they have to make, such as, do I eat this week? Can I buy that little bit extra rice? Can I take my child to the doctor? They're the sorts of day-to-day choices that people on our people who are our neighbours ought not be making.
Yes, yeah, indeed. Well, you're certainly not afraid of challenging situations. Jeffrey, how are you enjoying being a parish priest again?
Oh, I'm having a good time.
Yeah.
I'm enjoying the people of the parish of Painesville. Mind you, we've only had a certain amount of time all together.
Yeah.
But no, I'm enjoying it. In some ways, it's the basic stuff that I enjoy. Just being the people of God, being amongst them as one among others. Lots of them are very capable, able people. It's a pleasure to serve them. Yeah,
good on you. And you're getting any fishing in?
Occasionally, yes. I've been plotting a fishing trip in the near future, and the bream are biting in the Mitchell River at the moment.
Very good. You threatened to take me out on the boat, but be warned, I can't even catch a cold. So I promise you,
I'll get you to catch a fish.
I look forward to it. Bishop Jeffrey, it's wonderful to have you in the diocese. You've been a great colleague and support to me. I really value having you around as a wise person to go to for some counsel, for some encouragement, and you minister to us in all sorts of ways, seen and unseen, and we're very grateful for that and for your ministry historically in the diocese and in the National Church. Long may it continue.
It's been good to be with you today.
Thank you very much. See you next time.